Hello, everyone. It's Professor Buzzkill here, busting myths, taking names. One of my favorite things about the show is that we often bring up things that aren't necessarily myths, but things that aren't very well known. And I've recently received a book called Coming Out Republican: A History of the Gay Right, written by Dr. Neil Young, who's here with us, by the way. And it was absolutely eye opening. The long history of this process and long history of this, if you will, movement. But fortunately for you, you don't have to listen to me gab about it. Dr. Young is on the line. Hello, how are you? You know, one thing we should also tell the listeners is that you have your own podcast. Yeah, we came out at roughly the same time. I remember that. Your first book, by the way, is the "We Gather Together: The Religious Right and the Problem of Interfaith Politics." So, I suppose really my first question to you is: it must be very interesting studying a political group, a political party, a political wing, if you will, that has so many contrary movements or opposing movements within it, yet from the outside or from a hyper summarized version, it seems to have a single message. You know, Republicans and right wingers have this small government, uh, highly Christian moralism, highly Christian moral values element to it, and yet both in We Gather Together and in this wonderful book coming out, A History of the Gay Right Republican, we see how immensely diverse it is, really. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. I just found it amazing because, especially now, it seems to me that things are becoming, it doesn't just seem to me, everybody knows this, things are becoming so much more extreme. But also, the message of, for instance, the log cabin Republicans, who we should define a little bit later in the show, is also getting stronger. So it seems to me that in one way things are getting much worse, but in the other way there's this large counteracting force. Hmm. But listen, I mean, I was astounded by a number of things in the book, and perhaps the first one, the biggest one, is how far back the gay Republican movement, or at least, if you will, attempts by gay Republicans to make themselves known within the party and try to get the party to A, recognize them, and B, start working at least somewhat in favor of gay rights. How old that is? I would have assumed. In fact, I probably did assume before starting the book that it was the 1990s. That around the don't ask, don't tell period, people sort of started to become more comfortable about these things. But you show that it goes way, way back to the 50s at a minimum. Hmm. 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 Yeah, just to be flippant for a moment, he has perhaps the greatest name I've ever read. At the very least, it's one of the best pirate names for a non-pirate. Dorr is his first name, and Legg is his last name. I've just thought that was hilarious. Well, not hilarious, but I just thought that was interesting. Both his first name and last name have four letters, and they end in double consonants. It's almost as if it was made up for a pirate cartoon. Tell us about him. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I find this so interesting, and oh, by the way, Buzzkillers, please don't fall into the trap that the Democrats of the 1940s were the opposite of the Republicans in the 1940s. In other words, the Democrats were open to homosexuals or were homophiles in any way. Both parties were certainly very bigoted in this way, but even Dorleg even goes so far as in August 58 to write this fascinating article that you write about called he just he stands up and entitles it "I'm glad I am homosexual." And you point out that that makes a big impact even though the magazine had been out for a while. Yeah. Mm. No, no. Yeah. 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 Ugh. Mm. Sure. But what's so interesting, well, one of a thousand things are so interesting just in this one chapter, is that as you just implied a minute ago, sure, there's Dorleg being very upfront and saying, I am glad that I am being homosexual, but that I am homosexual. But there are other homosexuals in LA and other parts of America at the time who don't want to be public about it. They think they prefer to be, if you will, in the closet or quiet about it because they feel that that's the only way they can be protected. So, my I guess my question here is, if you had to put a number on it or percentage on it, what's the percentage within the homophile movement or the homophile group, I should say, in this period that is more like Dorleg than the majority? Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Mm. And in many ways, the libertarian version of this argument is perhaps the smartest or the most understandable because, after all, we're talking about people who, as adults in the 40s and 50s, are are politically active or at least reading one magazine and writing for it. But that means they've lived through Hoover's war on gays, for instance. They've lived through, I mean, they grew up undoubtedly in a probably in a religious environment that was very strictly no, no, no. They must have, the whole culture was against it. It was to be unthinkable to come out. So I can see a lot of homophiles in this period saying, no, libertarianism is the only way to go. So how does this then work within the Republican Party? Because, of course, there's a very strong, especially from the 40s onward, there's a very strong libertarian, the, shit, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah. There's a very, especially from the 1930s, there's a very strong wing of libertarianism and streak of libertarianism in the Republican Party. You have Robert Taft, and of course later you have Barry Goldwater and things like that, uh, and people like that. So how can gay Republicans at the time try to present this to the rest of libertarian Republicans, and how can they hope to get sort of traction with them? Hmm. Right. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. By the way, let's tell everyone, especially our foreign listeners, what a ballot initiative means in the United States, particularly in California, where it's very common. Yeah, it's a referendum. Yeah. Hmm. Mhm. Well, a lot of our listeners who are of sort of my age, if not your age, will think to themselves as we're talking about the early '70s that this sort of coincides with Anita Bryant and her anti-gay movements and anti-gay campaigns. Now, I mean, I know this because I read the book, but please tell the listeners: is this coincidence, or is she? Does she, when she sees the ballot initiative go up, is that a thing? Is that a reason for her to say, "Oh, yes, I need to sort of get on this train too"? Yeah. Mm. Well, and also this is the first time that really a lot of people. Sorry, my effing MacBook has this fan that occasionally turns on, and it's incredible. I don't. Shit. I don't know what to do about it. But see, normally I use my Big Mac, but the camera stopped working because it's getting old. I'm trying to figure out how to shut this fucking thing off. You don't happen to know, do you? Well, it does, but it was running before, and now it's running like crazy, and it's very, very loud. Shit. Well, what I may do is I may go back and re-record these questions in a different way. But anyway, what was I about to ask you? Yeah, okay. Well, I think for a lot of people too, this is really the first time with Anita Bryant anyway. First time gayness and gay rights really becomes a national political issue. So yes, we have it in California with the ballot initiative, and yes, you have Anita Bryant stoking things up in Florida. And certainly, I remember the flyover states, if you will, starting to pick up on this. And by the way, Anita Bryant, folks, was against a lot of things she thought were immoral and campaigned against a raft of things, but anti-gayness was the big one. How does it sort of play out in the rest of the country? Mm, mm. Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. No, 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 no. Hmm. But when someone's reading the middle chapters, the middle to late chapters of this book before we get to the um, Trump era, if you will, uh, you could get the impression that yes, but in the long run, even amongst Republicans, the Anita Bryant strain of anti-gayness loses. That first of all, log cabin Republicans survives, right? None of the things that Anita Bryant wants to change about grooming and teaching become really part of the actual party itself. So how does that happen? I mean, are there enough pure libertarians in the Republican Party who are saying, oh, yes, we may agree with you socially and morally, but we don't agree with you politically, and so we're not going to touch this issue? Or are there other things going on? Well, sorry, I shouldn't. Yeah, I'm exaggerating. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Oh no, no, no. Yeah. Hmm. Mm. And yeah, the sheer number of people coming out over this in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and parties starting to realize, oh, we have to court them in some way. It seems to me absolutely crucial. But that, of course, doesn't mean that the Republican Party all of a sudden takes an incredibly progressive stance on gay issues. Hmm. Hmm. That's right. Yes. Hmm. Right. Yeah. Well, I think we better leave it there because if we talk any more chronologically anyway, we're going to run into the Trump era and the very strangeness, the very strange nature of the Trump era, but that also gives our listeners a great number of chapters to read because all the way from chapter 14 all the way to 19 is exactly what you talk about. So, I guess my final question is, what's it like writing this book? Again, fuck, this fan is fucking just roaring away. Anyway, what's it like writing this book about gay Republicans? And again, that's that sort of similar problem of oh, shit. What am I trying to say? Versus writing about different interfaith problems within the Republican Party, or on the religious right, I should say. Yeah. Mhm. Well, yeah. 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 Hmm. Well, I didn't know that that's when you had sort of wrapped the book up and shopped it around in 2020, because it certainly doesn't read that way. First of all, the introduction starts in 2022, takes us through 2023, and the final chapters do as well. So you must have done a lot of last minute rewriting of those sections in order to get it ready for. Yeah. Well, as I say, folks, it is an absolutely great book, as Dr. Young's first book certainly was as well. And we're going to put them both on the Buzzkill bookshelf for you to get. And it just remains for me to say thank you so much for coming on the show. Oh, thanks. Folks, please go to Professor Buzzkill, do everything you need to do there. Go to the Buzzkill bookshelf and get these two books. And we'll talk to all of you next week.